As you can see, when I was creating my poster, the first step was to open Photoshop up and change the dimensions so it was A4 international paper, and this is so that when I print it out it doesn't pixelate and it stays the same resolution. Yeah, and then after it was opened, I had my work area, which is this little place here where you actually put your design on. There was the floating palette, which had the adjustment layers. It had gradients, or I could have, and then I also had my toolbar here. And when you select a tool, as you can see, I had the select tool selected. It comes up with the toolbar options here, up top here. So the first thing I did was I imported the image of my face, and I changed the saturation of it so that it was there was no color in it and it was just grey. And then I also made the image a little lighter so that it'd be easier to blend into the background later on. I then used a eraser tool, and I changed the hardness so that it was at 0%, and I blurred out the edges so that it blended into the background even more, as you can see there, so it fades into the background. I then pressed Command M to bring up the curves box, and I played around with the line, and I put it higher so that it would make my face actually lighter, like the tones of my face lighter, making it blend in even more to the background. I then went on Google and found an image of Robin, and I imported it into Photoshop, and I pressed Command T to bring up this box, and with this box I could resize it. But first I had to click on this button here so that it doesn't so that it keeps its resolution, because if it's not ticked you can stretch it out in different directions, and therefore it will become pixelated. Once I had resized it, I then decided to cut it out using the magic wand tool. I like the magic wand tool because it's a lot easier and it's pretty accurate as well. So I just clicked around him and it came up with this box, and it has the ants, and this shows where it's going to cut out. So then the reason why I did this is so that his background is transparent, and as you can see, before I cut it out there was that white box there, which is part of that image, which is covering my face, and I don't want that. I want it to be make it look like he's actually part of the image. So I cut it out, and then I went to File, then Preferences, and I went to Interface. I did this so that I could untick these two boxes, which is Open Documents as Tabs and Enable Floating Document Window docking. The reason I did this is so that it's easier to get one image from one tab onto another, rather than having two tabs that are part of the same window. I then went to Performance, and I changed my history from 20 to 1000. I did this so that if I want to go back to see what I did earlier on, or to just go back to what I did earlier on, I can do this easily and go back very far, rather than if it had stayed at 20 I could only go back 20 steps, and then I'd probably not be able to change a lot of things that I didn't like. After that I went to Google again and found an image of a landscape. As you can see, it's colored, and what I did is I pressed Command T again to bring up the box, and so I could resize it. As you can see there, it's got bigger, and what I did is I got the eraser tool again, made sure the hardness was at 0% so that it gives a nice fade and it blends it in, and I started to just rub out the edges so that it faded into the background as well. As you can see, I'd finished blurring it into the background there, and then I decided to change the hue and saturation. So what I did, well, change the saturation and lighting this time. So what I did is I went, pressed Command U, and it brought up the hue and saturation box. And what I did is I put the saturation down to -100%, and I put the lightness to +10. I'm doing all of this, making it all grey right now and all similar tones, so that later on when I start adding gradients and stuff, it blends nicely and it looks like one image rather than loads of different images added together. I then decided to add my first gradient overlay, and what I did is I went to the adjustment layers and gradient maps on the floating palette over here, and I decided to go for a bluey color. So as you can see, the gradient is from a dark blue to a light blue, and what I did is I clicked overlay, so that instead of it just being completely over the whole thing and you couldn't see any of the images, it blended in nicely and everything looks the same tone and looks like it's part of one image. I put the opacity down of the actual gradient map so that the color wasn't too concentrated. The next step was for me to change the background from the strong white that it was. I just put the lightness, I made it darker by going on hue and saturation and putting the lightness down to about -11, just so that it was grey, but then when it, with the gradient map over it, it just looks like a darker blue, which matches the color of the sky and of Robin and of my face. I then got the rub tool, made it smaller so that it didn't rub out the whole of him. So I put the size down, but I kept the hardness at 0%, and I just blurred out these white edges here. As you can see, I've blurred it out there, but here you can still see a white line. So I just done that just so that it looks more professional and more clean. I then used the brush tool in the toolbar here. Click the brush tool, and on the toolbar options up here, I made the size bigger to 190, put the opacity down to 0, and I made sure the color on the toolbar was black. And then I just went around the outline of my image. I just went around it, and I put the opacity down for it because the black, as you can see, is pretty concentrated and is overpowering the whole image. So I just put the opacity down, and that's what it looked like there. So it just gave it a nice little black grayish outline, just, you know, to make it more smooth. The next step was to start on my actual text, choosing what fonts I was going to use and stuff. So I started out by just putting what I wanted it to say. So I decided to go with Robin, the takeover. And then I tried putting the text side by side, and first of all I saw that it wasn't big enough, so as a title I think it should be bigger, and it being side by side was a bit boring. So then I made the text bigger, and I decided to put the Robin above it, so change the position of it, and I thought this idea, putting Robin above, was a lot better. I then made the Robin bigger so that it didn't look too small, and I double clicked the Robin layer to bring up the layer styles, and then I selected gradient editor, and I gave it a gradient overlay, and I decided to go with a black to red, because Robin's logo is red and the background is quite dark as well, so I thought a black to red would work quite nicely. I then gave it a stroke, which is just a little black outline, and a drop shadow as well, just to give it more of a 3D effect. As you can see, I wasn't too happy with the font being the same, so I decided to change the font of Robin, and I looked online and I found a good Batman font. So I changed the word Robin to that font, but I kept the takeover at a standard font so that you can tell that Robin is the main thing, but it's the takeover, that's the series. I then thought, well, as you can see there, the eye is right now just a normal color, but I thought just to add another splash of red on the image, I would get the brush tool and made sure the hardness was always at 0%. I use 0% quite a lot because it blurs it in quite nicely rather than it being 100% and it just looking like a solid block, and then it just doesn't blend in with the image nicely. So I started out by just making the eye, the color of the eye black using a brush tool, and then I double clicked the layer, and I gave it a color overlay which was red, and then I also added another gradient overlay on top of all of that, which was a black to grey, just to give it more depth and make it just bring out the colors more, because as you can see before there, it's quite faded. It's quite wait, over here it's quite light, quite faded. It's not very, the colors aren't very strong, but when I added the black to grey overlay, the colors became more concentrated and a lot stronger. I then went to File, Save As, and I saved it as a PNG because you get a really good resolution with it. It comes out high quality, and that's what you want with your posters. And that is the end. Thank you for watching.